Other than the absolutely maltreated looking horses, Dark Riders are probably one of my favorite looking light cavalry in the game, probably one of my favorite elven units overall in terms of aesthetic. I don't know, just something about the Desert Raider kind of hoods and so on. They have very small, kind of realistic looking cone sizes, not too ridiculous on cone heads. Myself facing my patron Noldor here. High Elves versus Dark Elves. I'm going with Dark Elves here, so let's talk a little bit about Dark Riders before these armies meet, and about the armies themselves. I'm going with Rakarth here on his chariot. We've got double Manticore and Lore of Beasts for a nice, fun, thematic build. Some Cold One chariots as well, pretty decent in this matchup. I like them a little bit better against High Elves due to the heavier armor and better armor-piercing damage in melee, obviously, over something like Scourge Runner chariots, although they are a little bit more expensive. 4 regular Dark Riders and 1 repeater crossbow, so we are going to be talking about both variants of Dark Riders here, both very important to the Dark Elves. Quickly, let's go over Noldor's army as well. A couple of Illyrian Reavers here, and we've got Arcane Phoenix, Tyrion on foot, which is actually a surprisingly strong choice right now in many situations. Mage of Light, Archers, Sisters of Avalorn, Lothern Seaguard on the flanks. Yeah, some White Lions and Silver Helms. Arcane Phoenix, pretty good choice. Probably one of the best single-entity monsters right now for High Elves, due to a variety of factors. But anyway, Dark Riders, what they offer, great charge bonus for the cost. 40 charge bonus is quite nice for a light shock cavalry. They don't have a whole lot of staying power, but they're cheap. I mean, they're the cheapest elven cavalry available in the entire game. Only 450 for the unshielded variant, 500 for the shielded variant, which generally I do think is a pretty good upgrade. Gives them 28 melee defense, which is solid. 24 melee attack, again, decent, but really about that 40 charge bonus, especially given that when Murderous Prowess is active, they get an additional melee attack charge bonus buff, right? So that charge bonus, I think, goes all the way up to 50 during that uptime. Great. Of course, you've got the repeater crossbows. They're, as I mentioned before, more like mounted missile infantry than traditional skirmish cavalry. But anyway, as I approach here, my micro is going to get a little bit tied up on trying to keep these chariots from getting blasted. The one chariot is going to get absolutely nuked by focus fire, so that's fine. We're just immediately going to exploit this little gap here in the formation, push back, get on those archers, get the manticores in, summon manticore as well, but all of that means I'm going to horribly miss micro. I had an opportunity to charge like 2v1 on both of these units of Illyrian Reavers, and I actually failed to do so, and now instead I'm going to catch one of these Illyrian Reavers kind of on an awkward side uphill charge, but the Silver Helms get a beautiful rear charge in here, and all of a sudden this cavalry combat is really not going in my favor. Illyrian Reavers better sustained combat stats than Dark Riders, same charge bonus because of that martial prowess. They're a little bit more expensive as well, and no shields for 550 cost. Meanwhile, over here, just absolute anarchy in the back line. Rakarth and the chariots going to town. Dark Riders finally arriving, but we're going to try and get some rear charges here, see if we can't proc a terror out. But rear charging White Lions, I mean, you can see even a relatively armored unit, 90 armor, sorry, on White Lions, they still do a pretty decent amount of damage on the charge there. Granted, some of that's from the Manticore as well, but the 40 charge bonus is definitely nothing to scoff at. Meanwhile, over here, these Dark Riders and Illyrian Reavers up on the high ground with the Silver Helms. I'm eventually starting to get some damage on the Silver Helms with the repeater crossbows, but still not a cost-effective engagement for me at all, which is definitely a big problem, potentially. We'll see. Still got plenty of ammunition left on these Cold One chariots and on the repeater crossbows. We managed to catch the Arcane Phoenix in a really nice engagement here with Rakarth and a summoned Manticore. The debuff was active as well, debuffing the melee defense and removing the terror from the Arcane Phoenix. Did not get a terror out, but here comes Murderous Prowess, and unfortunately, during that uptime, my Dark Riders here mostly gone. I am just horribly mismicroing them in many ways, and here again, going to get them caught by Silver Helms and Reavers. Very unfortunate situation, so will that end up coming back to haunt me? We'll see. Dark Riders are generally very important for Dark Elves for a number of reasons. Number one, Dark Elves are pretty squishy. You can take more numbers than any other Elven faction reliably, but at the same time, your units are squishy with no healing. and being able to chase routing units off is super important for the Dark Elves. My caster, Lore of Beast, just getting shattered by Tyrion. Thankfully, just barely gets off the last Panic Manticore summon. And we've got some Dark Riders coming back with the charge bonus buff of Murderous Prowess active. They won't miss out on it, but as soon as they rally, basically it goes off, right? So they'll continue to hold that even after the overall timing wears off. I'm going to try and use them to clean up some of these Tatter units here, get a really nice engagement on these Illyrian Reavers. It's going to be a great trade for me considering the Martial Prowess is gone. I've got Murderous Prowess active, but Noldor doing a great job here, Anti-Mage, aka charging up with the Silver Helms and the Reavers to immediately respond, shut down that attempt. Chariots, too, are still online and have been for some time, definitely racking up quite a bit of value, working with the Manticore here in tandem. The other Summon Manticore is going after the Arcane Phoenix. Yeah, I believe the Arcane Phoenix actually finished one of my true Manticores. It's still here. Okay, over there on the side. And you can see the Dark Riders starting to do one of the things they're actually best at, which is cleaning routing units, especially like in a comeback phase. If you watch any battles on my channel of Dark Elves going back, you'll see plenty of Dark Rider play, both melee and repeater crossbow. Speaking of which, repeater crossbows are coming back from that horrible mismanagement earlier, but just in general, while you have that Murderous Prowess active, like, Dark Riders are a great unit for coming back into the game, like chasing routing units, getting decisive charges on Tatter units out in the periphery. They're probably one of the best light cavalry in the game at that, especially given their cost, and again, the timing from Murderous Prowess helps that so much in usually the critical situation, right? Like during the time of the battle where it matters most. Here, wasn't quite able to clean up all the routing units I wanted to. There's still quite a bit of, you can see, tattered units here that are just requiring that extra little bit of cleanup that's going to tax me into the late game. Balance of power really not looking in my favor. Still feeling okay, honestly. If I can finish off the Arcane Phoenix with Rakarth and the Chariots, kind of, you know, going bumper car style, I'm going to notice these repeater crossbows eventually, and essentially they're my only tool for dealing with Tyrion. I mean, Cycle Charge from Rakarth's Chariot, unfortunately, is just not enough with Tyrion's mass and everything. But, yeah, I'm going to bring these Dark Riders in once again, try and finish any Tatter units that we can get our hands on. The Manticore is in a similar type of situation here. And are we going to land a charge here? Will they actually just rout as the Arcane Phoenix drops its load all over the Chariots? Doesn't do too much damage, just a little bit, but Dark Riders do indeed land a charge here. Just about got an XP chevron. Will the archers actually beat them in combat is the question. Probably not, but well, the Dark Riders might just rout due to numbers here. There's 18 versus 9. Yeah, law of numbers there not working out in their favor. Just getting so heavily outnumbered. Silver Helms, though, I'm going to try and clean up. And I know it might seem a little bit odd to showcase a replay where I horribly mismanaged a unit, but I wanted to show this for a number of reasons. Number one is I have a lot of Dark Elf replays these days, and I've been meaning to cover Dark Riders for a while. Second, it kind of shows in a way, as these skirts on the Silver Helms are absolutely wigging out, let's not look at that too close, is that Dark Riders are so important for the Dark Elves. It might not seem like it, but like having such a cheap unit be your win condition, but in many cases, managing your light cavalry well, not only for the Dark Elves, but for many factions, can determine the outcome of some matchups. And Dark Riders are absolutely a huge part of that, and especially because some of the factors I discussed earlier. Low HP overall, no healing. You can go relatively wide, but just not a lot of sustainability in comparison to some other factions. You know, without going too elite, just generally evening out the numbers in your favor is very important, and you can often get breaks by winning individual engagements due to your units in some cases just being a little bit better, maybe on melee attack, melee defense, maybe have good weapon damage, whatever the case. You can generally win engagements, but then, you know, getting those units off the field, super, super important. And repeater crossbows, of course, I haven't really talked about too much, but they are one of the most important tools for the Dark Elves. Long been, you know, a key unit for kiting and for dealing damage. Given that it's hard to protect infantry skirmishers, Dark Riders also have excellent DPS overall. Not quite as good as something like a throwing axe, but I want to say they have more ammunition. We can look at that in just a minute. But at this point, these Dark Riders are my only hope again for taking down Tyrion. I'm going to miss-micro them. Somehow they decided to go in melee, even though they had a shooting attack order, which I thought we were past this bug a while ago. But at this point, basically, a little bit worried. Yeah, but I think maybe I can win. Like, mathematically, I just have enough that if I can get Tyrion low and rout him without him taking the Heart of Avalorn proc, I can actually beat him. But that's my only hope at this point. One more melee Dark Rider charge. Desperate in here. Maybe a little bit ill-fated. Trying to recoup some kind of value, but mostly just trying to allow their crossbow brethren to get back in this fight. We've also got a Manticore for some clutch late game routes, so let's see. The idea here, if we can route the caster, that gets rid of one single entity, just leaving Tyrion. Again, the Terror will kind of take hold of these infantry units that are very tattered as well. Maybe I have a chance to come back in this. And it's definitely going to be because of these repeater crossbows if that's the case. Tyrion's starting to take some damage. A Life Mage does get terrified and routed, but Tyrion just kills the Manticore straight up, even as he's getting rammed from behind by Rakarth. Rakarth will get a couple of hits in here, but Tyrion, again, because of the mass changes, he's just not going to get knocked over by Rakarth's chariot. And so the cycle charging is not as effective as it would have been in the past. I mean, not that Rakarth was even in the game during that time, but you know what I mean. Rakarth, at least, though, can run around and charge these different infantry units, and as per the, attacking rules, with Dark Riders having ammo, their ranged attack does still count as attacking, so in theory I could just continue to cycle charge, and I probably should go try and break this unit of Lothern Seaguard way out here, and just continue to let Dark Riders, chew on Tyrion. If this were a tournament game and there were, stakes on the line, I would probably do that, but this is just a patron practice game, and, I want to be somewhat courteous to my patrons and not waste too much time. I mean, potentially I could, but it's pretty low likelihood, and even then, as I charge in, Tyrion gets a hit or two on Rakarth, like 1 or 2 arrows from the Lothern Seaguard land on the Dark Riders, and that's enough for me to take the L. So again, a little bit odd to feature such an important and honestly very good unit in a loss, but it's just to illustrate that it's such an important unit for the Dark Elves in many situations, especially here. All those archers and stuff, eventually I was able to shut it all down, right? But you just see that the extra effort I have to put in to clean up those very few kind of tattered units scattered around. In theory, if I had microed my light cavalry better, some of those very tattered units in the late game might not potentially be there, and maybe I have a little bit of cavalry as well to kind of charge in on Tyrion, maybe, knock him over, although probably not. At the very least, just have something more for when Rakarth charges in so he doesn't take all the hits. Anyway, a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but generally I would say Dark Riders are a critical unit here, even with how horribly I mismanaged them. One of them was still able to pay for itself in melee. In the melee variant, the ranged one also just barely getting its value back on some really nice damage on Tyrion. And that's the thing, even if you do somewhat misuse them, which is relatively easy to do, they're pretty squishy Elven light cavalry. The cost is just great enough, low enough, I should say, that they can pay for themselves. Old One Chariots do quite well here. Manticore is also a little bit of a mixed bag, but even at 600 points, almost paying for itself. Rakarth does a pretty decent job as well. My infantry, not so much. Dark Riders definitely, though. I mean, that's more or less where I lost the battle, in my view. Credit to Noldor here, my patron. Definitely has learned some things along the way and punishing me for my mistakes. Great job with Foot Tyrion, kind of responding to different situations. Yeah, the Arcane Phoenix had a little bit of a rough time, but did tank quite a bit of damage. You can see the cavalry engagement, how bad it was for me. The Reavers and Silverhelms for him definitely paid for themselves. Was able to manage the archers relatively well. I mean, Lothern Seaguard, some of the archers pay for themselves, but the Sisters, not really. White Lion's pretty decent here, actually. Do pay for themselves. Probably fighting chariots and stuff. Anyway, Dark Riders. So, yeah, they're cool looking. They're very important. The Murderous Prowess is a huge benefit to them, especially given how cheap they are. We've got these different variants here, and we'll pull in the other Elven Light Cavalry as they're obviously the best comparison. I've talked before about Glade Riders when they released. I would have to check. I know I've talked about the range variant of Illyrian Reavers, probably talked about the melee ones as well, although perhaps not. But both of these guys, I mean, for the High Elves and Wood Elves, you pay $550 for the base variant. That, for Glade Riders, does have a shield, but, I mean, you really only gain Woodsman and not a lot of other benefit. Like, in my mind, the Dark Riders, not having Woodsman is definitely a thing, but Murderous Prowess is just better. And I mean, they have slightly better stats overall. +4 melee attack in particular is pretty decent, and +5 leadership, but 15 less armor and 45 less HP isn't a lot, but when you're that squishy, every little bit helps, right? And just the fact that you can even choose to take without a shield for straight up 100 less points, I mean, definitely a marked difference in stats. I mean, 4 melee attack, 8 melee defense in particular, 1 less weapon strength as well, which is interesting, I guess. But yeah, the Dark Riders seem like not that much of a difference, but with Elves, it always matters how you can save points. So in my mind, Dark Riders are just that much more cost effective. And 650, I mean, granted, again, in function, Dark Riders with crossbows are very different from ranged Glade Riders and Reavers. They're not 360 shooting. They can't even fire on the move like Empire Outriders, who are probably the best comparison. In terms of DPS output, Dark Riders on paper are a little bit lower, but because the scatter shot thing, accuracy can be a little bit different as well. Generally, they perform better, I find, against infantry and cavalry, like multi-model units. Sometimes they can do pretty well against single entities, but I think some of the difference is in fire rate as well. Like Outriders, I think, have a faster fire rate. But again, not the same melee prowess as repeater crossbows, especially, I mean, 20 charge bonus, then you consider the extra, which it's not a lot of extra, but still, it's more than what you would get with a lot of other similar type of skirmish cavalry, right? And in a pinch, they can definitely take advantage of that extra melee attack and charge and everything. And of course, they also get a missile damage buff from Murderous Prowess, which is something to consider as well. While it's active, they just straight up do more damage with their missile attacks. So a lot of things to consider about Dark Riders. As to where they would fit overall in the kind of grand scheme of light cavalry, personally, I would rate them pretty high. Like, you've got a pretty decent ranged option. The melee option in particular is quite cost effective, really nice charge bonus, and Murderous Prowess benefits them disproportionately, I would say, because of their role as cavalry than other units, perhaps. The extra leadership, too, given how squishy they are, can definitely help them stay in the fight when other light cavalry would have long fled the field. So hopefully you guys learned something from this. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. See you next time.